Okay, the issue. Many states are taking human rights and freedoms from transgender kids and adults, particularly in conservative leaning states. In Missouri, there have been several anti trans bills that have become laws. One law that was passed was SB 49, the so called SAFE Act. SAFE stands for Save Adolescents from Experimentation. This was enacted last year and blocks the ability of trans kids to use puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones, or gender reassignment surgery as gender affirming treatments before the age of 18. This has put a stop to life improving and sometimes life saving care. There were 10 anti trans bills in the first 3 weeks of the 2024 session. One is SB 868. It claims to be helping kids while harming them by taking freedoms and systemically marginalizing them. This bill makes it mandatory for teachers and other school workers to use the pronouns that a child was born with, and that they must get parental permission with a name not used on their enrollment. This effectively means school officials must out children to their parents, potentially putting them in harm's way. This bill will also keep children from being able to be themselves and force kids to hide who they feel themselves to be. If a parent and child agree on the child's gender identity, new name, and pronouns, they cannot force teachers to use the new name, gender, or preferred pronouns. The teacher will be allowed to disrespect the child as he or she sees fit. Finally, this bill also prohibits teaching course components that may influence a person under the age of 18 to change their identity. This, of course, is very subjective, and the penalties for these violations are not defined, but are left up to the school district. So a little bit of background. Why has there been a sudden attack on trans rights? Well, gay people gained the right to marry in 2008, and in June of 2022, there was the fall of Roe v. Wade in the Supreme Court decision. The supermajority of Republicans in the Missouri legislature were ready and quickly took away the right to abortion in the state. This left the Republicans without an out group to other. They needed a new issue to stir the emotions on the right. They quickly settled on trans children and adults. They also created boogeymen out of diversity, equity, and inclusion education, as well as critical race theory, often mischaracterizing these issues as well as further marginalizing vulnerable populations, including trans people, who tend to want to take freedoms from these trans people. Well, studies show that they tend to be biblical literalists, such as evangelicals and fundamentalists. People who value in-group authority also easily fall into these lines. These groups of people tend to be conservative or Republican. What is gender-affirming care? Gender-affirming care is any steps that are taken, socially or medically, that affirm the gender that a person feels they are. There are several ways to affirm. It can be simply a social transition, changing appearances with their hair or clothes, changing a name and pronouns. And with those changes, they also may use gendered facilities that match their new identity. This type of transition is easily reversible. Another kind of treatment is puberty blockers. This stops puberty from happening to give a person more time to decide if they want to more fully transition and keep unwanted secondary sex characteristics from becoming something that they will need to fix later. This treatment is also reversible. You just have to stop the blockers and puberty progresses. This treatment is also used in children with other issues such as precocious puberty. Although no treatment is without risk, this is very safe. The next step in transition that some people want to use is hormone therapy. This helps a person develop the secondary sex characteristics that are desired, such as breasts or a beard. This is partially reversible. Finally, there is gender reassignment surgery. This is generally not done until adulthood. The outcome of gender-affirming care is better mental health, less isolation, depression, and fewer suicides. In addition to that, less than 1% of trans people regret their transitions and detransition. This is compared to 11% of cisgendered people who have similar surgeries. The medical and political ethics involved in trans healthcare. In medicine, a fundamental right is the right to self-determination or bodily autonomy. We feel that a patient should be able to make their own decisions after being informed about the risks and benefits of medications or procedures. The political right believes it is unethical to allow minors, even with parental consent, to make decisions on their own gender. They also find that people with depression or neurodivergency should not be able to make a decision about their gender, even as fully functioning adults. Note that they do not believe that these conditions necessarily interfere with other medical decisions. They are also aware that trans people are more likely to be ADHD, autistic, and have anxiety and depression. A very important fact to be aware of when considering the compassionate care of trans people is that 29% of trans and non-binary youth attempted suicide in 2020. 54% of trans and non-binary youth seriously considered suicide in that same year. There are several social myths around trans people. One myth is that trans people are predators who want to use bathrooms to harm women and children. In reality, trans people are more likely to be victimized in bathrooms. In reality, there is no evidence of increased predation when laws allow trans people the right to use the bathrooms that match their gender identity. Logic also tells us that a man can dress as a woman at any time and enter a woman's bathroom. Lastly, if a person assigned female at birth has transitioned to male and is required to use the bathroom of birth gender, a lot of very masculine people will be required to enter the women's bathroom. They may be treated as a cis man would be. One more fact is that anti-trans bathroom laws lead to the inability of trans people to use public gendered facilities at all. A second social myth is that people assigned male at birth will transition to female to be able to win at sports. The reality is that trans people are more likely to leave sports and miss out on all of the benefits of sports because they are discriminated against. There is no evidence that after transitioning that they are at an advantage. As a person takes hormone blockers or hormones, the changes associated reduce any advantage they may have had. Many sports organizations, including the IOC or International Olympic Committee, have rules that regulate hormones even more than necessary and actually keep trans people at a disadvantage. Many other organizations have adopted the same overly strict rules. Even when put at a disadvantage, of course, there will be some people who will rise to the top, as in every marginalized group of people. An economic issue is that studies show the gross domestic product, or the GDP, grows by 3% per capita when countries have trans supportive laws. So what can we do differently to have a state that uses evidence and compassion to support trans people? One, we could repeal all of the recent anti-trans laws. I do not see this as a viable option in this state currently. A second policy alternative would be to pass a law that was passed in Minnesota to protect trans people from the laws of other states that would harm them. This law, HF 146, was known as the Trans Refuge Bill, and it was signed into law on April 27th in 2023. This enacted the state's right to keep other states with extreme laws from taking children from their parents who allow their children to have gender-affirming care or be removed from parents who are trans. This even protects children who are